ahead and get started. Just a reminder, this is being recorded. And really appreciate you guys joining us for our first start to our webinar series for this year. Topic's going to be ePRO. And before I hand it over to Laura and Angela, do have a couple of announcements, introductions I wanted to share. I'm Anthony Veracali. I'm our Director of Sales here at DFnet, joined by Laura J. and Angela, who are going to be providing a little bit more of the depth of the conversation. But before I hand it over to them, as you can see, this ePRO webinar is the first of what's going to be a bi-monthly series of webinars this year that we'll be hosting. And it's a great opportunity for us to share just industry trends, some success stories, and hopefully that'll be something that will resonate with our current future partners who are on the call here. But with that said, the next webinar is going to be held in April, and our colleague Boosie will be presenting on the importance of offline data collection and how to enable that functionality within your CDMS for DFdiscover users. And additionally, as you can see on the right, we're excited to announce that a date and location has been selected for our annual DFUG conference this year. It's going to be in Boston on Thursday, October 3rd and Friday, October 4th. SCDM is also that same week in Boston, Monday through Wednesday. So we figured we'd pick up the following days and create some efficiencies for any of you who might be joining that conference as well. Move to the next slide here. All right, so of course, me being a sales guy, I'd be remiss to not share a bit of info with you before handing it over to Angela and Laura. With that in mind, I want to quickly speak to the ways in which we can explore partnering with your team as we navigate through 2024 together with new projects on all of our roadmaps, as I'd imagine. But in case you're unaware, before today, we have a team of experts that can be leveraged as an outsourcing partner for your upcoming studies for data science, biostats, data management services as well. And our partners have found that when our team manages study data through the life of the clinical trial, it provides better workflows, consistency, as opposed to having to switch processes with each phase and depend on different CROs, methods of data management each and every trial. So that level of consistency is really important. In addition to those services, we have some technology that will be supported for you as well. It's continued to evolve over the years and meet the needs of our clients and keep pace with the industry standards as well. And you can see on the screen the different types of SaaS offerings we can provide your team with. Starts with DFdiscover, which is our CDMS platform. It includes an EDC with web version capability, as well as online, offline data capture functionality. And in addition to an EDC, we're able to support with eConsent, randomization, and of course, our topic for today, ePRO. So having conversations with you guys, of course, is the only way I'm going to remain employed here. So please reach out. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to set up a follow-up for us. Go to the next slide. All right, great. I'll hop off my soapbox here, and I'll remain available in the chat for us as we move forward with the presentation. And as a reminder, this webinar is going to be recorded, and you can find this recording as well as others at our website. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Angela. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Anthony. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to start out today with the basics of what is ePRO. Well, patient-reported outcomes such as symptoms and survey responses, et cetera, in clinical trials is not new. It's been in use for many years. However, our focus today is to discuss how the pen and paper way of capturing these can be replaced with the use of electronic devices by the participants themselves to capture these same outcomes. So patient-reported outcomes are important because they bring the patient perspective along with the clinician assessments into data collection for analysis. And the move from capturing patient data from paper to electronic capture can increase the integrity and the accuracy of patient data. For example, you don't have to worry about participants bringing home a 7-day paper diary only to have them completed all on day 8 in the parking lot outside the site. They can instead capture it via electronic devices, their own devices, according to the timeline set by the protocol. And regulators generally prefer ePRO for these exact reasons. And further benefits to ePRO is the BYOD, or bring your own device approach, which can save money and increase compliance. It also brings some challenges, but we'll discuss those later. And BYOD makes sense. As you can see from this graph, starting from 2016, the use of smartphones worldwide has increased by the millions every year, and it's only expected to increase in the future. Some of the benefits of ePRO, number one, it's more convenient for the participant to answer questions and surveys right from the comfort of their own home without having to travel to the study site. There's improved data quality and adherence to protocol if the participant is answering questions per reminders that can be sent to their devices. And there can be logic checks, which can't be used with paper. Patient safety can be improved. Perhaps the patient's recording reactogenicity symptoms, and maybe they record a severe reaction that could trigger an alert to the clinician to then contact the participant. We don't have to wait for the patient to return a paper diary to review that data. As soon as they submit their responses, that data is available immediately in the EDC system. There can be cost savings, and administrative burden can be lessened by not having to create, print, and distribute diaries or have as many in-person or phone visits. And to expand on the improved data quality with ePRO, we're going to look to the ALCOA attributes that are considered extremely important for good quality data. Number one, it should be attributable. You should be able to trace the data directly back to the patient. So have the patient use their own login with their own password and their own PIN that can be traced directly in the audit trail. Number two, it should be legible. It's much easier to read data recorded via electronic capture over handwritten paper diaries. It's contemporaneous. With electronic devices, you can use technology to schedule the reminders and alerts to ensure that your protocol requirements surrounding timelines are met. And then it's original. Unlike paper, you can omit the transcription step. You don't need the site staff to enter data from paper source. The ePRO data is the source. And finally, it's accurate. ePRO solutions can use logic checks that aren't available for paper recording. For example, implementing ranges for recording a numerical response that may issue a message to the patient if they try to enter either a nonsensical or maybe an out-of-range response. And of course, the benefits are also challenges that we should consider when we're implementing ePRO. Security and privacy. How will you keep your patient data secure and maintain their privacy? Also, ensure that your electronic version of your diary or survey closely matches the paper equivalent. They should not vary by meaning. And you must account for patients that don't have access to or are unwilling to use technology in your trial. You don't want to introduce bias by only including patients, for example, that have smartphones. And you also have the added challenge of study staff having to manage devices and field questions from participants, whether the devices are supplied by the clinic or BYOD. And technology changes quickly. What's appropriate and new today may be replaced tomorrow by something else. And with that, I'm going to hand this off to Laura.
Thanks, Angela. So let's talk specifically about DFengage and how it will help you take advantage of the benefits of ePRO and also help you address the challenges that Angela just mentioned. So DFengage is the mobile application for study participants to be installed on their own devices that's fully integrated with DFdiscover. So it's a part of the system. It's built on this strong foundation so that a lot of the functionality that you're already familiar with using DFdiscover, if you are an existing user, DFengage lives on top of that existing functionality. For those of you who are not familiar with DFdiscover, it's a clinical data management system that's been around for 30 years at this point. We support many different modes of data capture, so giving you a lot of flexibility and customization available. Security, reliability, and regulatory compliance are really important to us, and we ensure that you're able to implement your data management requirements regardless of the sector you're in, the study phases, the therapeutic areas. So taking a look at what the components of DFdiscover include. So EDC is, of course, a core component of DFdiscover. So whether you're transcribing data from source documents, doing direct data capture, whether you're online or offline, we have tools to support that. We do continue to support paper CRFs. So if you are you still using those barcoded paper CRFs that are completed by site staff? We continue to support that alongside EDC. We also support remote monitoring, so capturing source documents in various different formats that live within the database alongside the CRF data to support the data review and monitoring process. We also support both data integration and data import from external systems so that DFdiscover can serve as the single source of all your study data, regardless of whether it's collected in other systems. And finally, ePRO, which is what we'll talk about in more detail today. So let's start with the participants' perspective. So as they get started with DFengage, try to keep things as simple as possible for them. So DFengage is available from the app stores, either Google Play or Apple App Store. So they install it directly on their own device. They're given a unique account to log in, that initial time to set up their account to make sure that we have that attributable component of Alcoa that Angela mentioned earlier. And they also need to set a PIN to protect their information. So they don't need to log in with their username every time that they open the app. They need to use that PIN to open it instead. So I'm going to go into more detail about what DFengage looks like in a minute, but the participant starts off completing activity by just clicking that start button. They go through the activity. Once it's completed, they'll see that shown under completed so they can see what they've accomplished that day. Later on, as new activities become available within DFengage, they'll receive a notification on their device that an activity is ready, and they just click on that notification to open the app again. And that's when they enter their PIN to continue with their activities. So that's sort of the quick look at the participant view, but let's take a step back and see sort of how both the people and the technology work together to address a lot of the ePRO challenges that Angela mentioned earlier. So a lot of the privacy and security issues in particular are addressed by the app itself. So as I just mentioned, there's no access to the app without a PIN number. And so we make sure that it's only the participant who's getting into the app and answering the questions within DFengage so that the source of the data is correct. The data is synced automatically with the server whenever the participant is online with the app open, so that there's nothing extra the participant needs to do to get that data submitted to the research team. Data is encrypted both at rest on the device and in transit on the way to the DFdiscover server. None of that study data stays on the device once it's synced. So none of this study information remains on the device once it's sent to the research team. And the app doesn't collect any participant information or personal information from the device either. So there's no geolocation or other personal information that's collected. It's just the activity that the participant is asked to complete that data within the application itself. So once the data is synced over to the DFdiscover server, it's also available in the EDC application. So this provides a unified database for the ePRO data, the EDC data, and any other data source that comes in. And the data access controls ensure that only authorized users are able to access the ePRO data. And the audit trail is available so you can see the history of any of the changes to the data over the course of the study. The site's role in this, in the ePRO component, sort of the first step is ensuring that the participant you're giving those login details, giving that DFengage access to is actually the person they say they are. So making sure that the person who has the user account is the real person who we are actually wanting to collect data from, an essential component of 21 CFR Part 11 requirements. The site would also train and support the participant in using the application and then reviewing the data also when it comes from the ePRO app. And of course, the study participant's main job is to complete the activities in the app on the schedule that's required by the study protocol and making sure that they're not sharing their PIN or their password with anyone else, so we can be sure that the data is just coming from them. So Angela mentioned one of the challenges is that not all study participants might have a device or might be willing to use an ePRO app on their phones. And so the flexibility that we have within DFdiscover really allows you to deal with those scenarios quite easily. So whether it's a specific subject who doesn't want to use a mobile app, or there's specific visits where the participant needs an alternative or a backup solution, you can also collect that ePRO, that patient outcome data through the EDC tool, whether you're at a clinic visit or on a phone visit, or even have paper versions of the patient outcomes, the questionnaires or the surveys that can be entered into the database at a later time. So when you're using ePRO, you're not stuck with only ePRO for your study. You can actually have ePRO with other solutions as well. In terms of how DFengage integrates with DFdiscover, it works within the existing ecosystem that you're familiar with as a DFdiscover user already. So the ePRO activities that you'll see in DFengage are created as plates in DFsetup. The ePRO activity schedule and the timing of the activities in DFengage are defined by the visit map. The user accounts for DFengage and their permissions are all defined in DFadmin. And DFWeb, DFExplore, and DFCollect all support the data review and oversight step with ePRO data. So reviewing the data, reviewing the audit trail, and making any corrections to errors in the ePRO data if that's allowed by role permissions. Okay, so now let's take an actual look at DFengage. Let's start from the participant's perspective. So here I am in the Google Play Store on an Android device, and I'm going to go ahead and install the app on my phone. So it'll download to my device and install, and I can open that once it's ready. And opening the app will take me to the login page. And this is where I enter my credentials that have been provided to me by the site. I just need to do this once to do the initial app setup on my device, and I won't need to go here again until later. I need to set my new password because I've entered a temporary password. And then here's where I set my PIN. So this is the number that I'll use to enter the app again at a later time. There are a few other pieces for the app setup in DFengage before they get started with activities. So enabling notifications is important. So both enabling notifications and allowing background running. So that will make sure that the notifications are delivered on time according to the protocol schedule. And that's all based off the local device time. We also support multi-language CRFs, so the participant is able to pick which language they want to see their activities in DFengage. So once I complete my setup, I see my Today page, which includes the activities that are available for me. So I have both upcoming activity for later in the day, and then a practice activity that's due right now. So clicking the Start button will open up that activity. So this is an opportunity, a way to get the participant to practice with the different types of questions that they might be asked in DFengage activities. So this is a generic example of some questions. So here's a date field where they have a calendar picker where they can pick the date. It'll default to the current date to make things simple, but they can also choose a different date. And similar with a time field, we provide a clock widget that allows them to specify the time or just select the current time on their device. They click the next button to proceed through each individual question. It's just one question per screen to keep things really simple and straightforward for them. We also include, you can also include help information for each question. So clicking that eye icon will provide more information that you've defined about the question. And you can also provide more information at the activity level as well. That's accessible up in the top bar there. We also support legal ranges for numeric fields. So here's an example where I need a legal value would be between 10 and 2000. And then if I enter a number outside of that range, I get that warning to say, it doesn't look like that number is correct. Please double check it before you continue. So it provides immediate feedback on whether the value entered is correct. We also support visual analog scale. So I can, instead of entering a number using the keypad, I can actually just select a number on a scale. So this could be used for, a number of different things. The actual numbers that are used are completely customizable per question. And here's my final question in this practice activity. So here I'm entering some short text. You can see the character counter at the bottom below the input field. So I can see how many characters I have left in that field to be entered. And I have some instructions added there at the bottom to let them know what to do. So once I click that finish button, the activity is now showing under the completed section. I have no more other activities that are due right now. I do have one upcoming activity that's due available later today, but I'll get a notification for that one once it's ready. That's sort of the initial setup phase for DFengage. And so let's take a look at what it looks like when the next activity becomes available and they'll receive the notification to open up the app again. My home screen, I've got the DFengage app icon, and there's a little badge icon notification saying that there's a notification for me. And so looking at my notifications, I can see there's a new activity. Clicking on that will open up the app where I enter my PIN code to make sure that it's me actually using the application. And I come in again to the Today page where I can see the activities that are due for me. And I'd also see overdue activities if I had any overdue, but I just have the one due right now. So similar to what we saw in the practice activity, each of the different data types of questions have different ways of entering the data. You can see the progress tracker up at the top shows me which question I'm on out of the total number of questions for this activity. You can also see that some of the questions have a red asterisk in the question text. And so those mean that the field's required. And until I provide a response to that question, I can't actually click the next button. You'll see that it's disabled. I'm not able to move ahead until I've answered that required question. You also have the ability to use a previous button to go back to a previous question to review it or correct it. And we also support branching logic. So if I answer yes, I'm asked to provide more information, but here if I answer no, my button updates to finish, and that's the final question of this activity. So I can see the activity shown under completed, and that's the completed today, but I can also see the other the other activities I've completed on previous days as well. So that's a quick look at the participant side of things for DFengage. And so now next let's look at the site perspective. So here we are in DF Web. So this is our web-based EDC tool. And so this is the dashboard showing me an overview of the subjects, the CRFs, and the queries in my database. And so I can say I have a couple of overdue visits here in the top tile in the pie charts. But I can look at my subject summary as well and see which specific participants have overdue visits. So I can see 3006 and 3008 have days that are overdue. So clicking into one of those subjects will show me their visit schedule. So I can see some of the activities that have been completed in the past have already been completed with a complete date. And then their ePRO day 5, day 6, day 7 are not yet completed and are becoming overdue. So clicking on that day 5 row will take me into the CRF for that visit. So I can see the questions that the participant will see in DFengage. And I can see just the exact same questions that the participant would see in DFengage, but formatted differently in an EDC style instead of the single question per screen that we saw in DFengage. And this data lives alongside the EDC data, so we can see the screening visit, enrollment visit. I can also monitor the overdue ePRO activities using tasks in DF Web. So here I've defined a task that pulls up all of the overdue ePRO activities so I can review them. So here again, we see subject 3006 and 3008 have overdue activities. And so whatever my process is for my study to help prevent missing data. So I follow up with a participant by phone, make sure that they have access to the app or have access to alternative or backup solutions if it's required. We also provide ways to review data, not just CRF by CRF, but also in listings. So we have a reports view in DF Web, and I'll pull up here ePRO reactogenicity listing. And so this listing includes reactogenicity data for all the participants at my site at all of the visits. So you can see all of the information that's been collected from DFengage so far. And listing like this, you can sort any of the columns in ascending or descending order. So you're able to look at specific columns in more detail or look at the specific values. You can also search by the different columns within the table. So if I select the participant ID here and enter a specific participant ID, I can see just the visits for this specific participant. So I can review, sort of see the reactogenicity responses over time for each of the ones that they've completed so far. So this really gives me a way to look at the data in different ways and drill down if needed to specific components. But instead of having to look CRF by CRF when you're getting this data in from the participant, it lets you see it all together in one area. And because ePRO data lives in the EDC system alongside the EDC data, we can also take advantage of the query management functionality. So in this study, we have an ePRO query category that we've used to apply queries to data that comes in through ePRO. So in this example, we have eDiary where the question is medication and dose taken, and we have the medication, but we don't have the dose. And so the query has been applied by the data manager or the monitor to provide the dose taken. So double clicking on that query will take me back into the CRF view so I can see the data that's been entered by the participant. And I can see the query that's been applied to that field. Clicking on the Q button on the side here will let me look at the query in more detail if I'd like to see more of the information. And so let's say I call up the participant to check with them to confirm what was the dose that you took on day 1 of your Motrin, and I can make that update directly within the system. I do need to provide a reason to explain why I'm changing the data to make sure that the audit trail contains the rationale for making changes to data that comes from the participant, just like any EDC data actually. And so here I'm providing an explanation for why I'm updating the data, and then making that change will set the query to pending so that the data manager or the monitor now knows that it's for them to review to confirm that the data has been updated appropriately. And if we pull up the page history, we can see the audit trail of the changes on this page. So if we scroll down here to the field that we were just on, the medication and dose taken, we can see the changes that have been made specifically to that field. So we can see the original entry by the participant with their anonymous participant ID, the data that they originally entered, the query that was added, and then the changes I just made where I modified the data, added a reason, and that query got updated to the pending status. So with DFWeb, we're really able to give the site a number of different tools to help monitor the ePRO data as it comes in, since typically with EDC data, they're actually entering the data, they're seeing all the data as it comes into the system. But with ePRO, they need some more tools to make sure that they're reviewing it and doing any oversight on the quality of the ePRO data, as well as ensuring that avoiding any missing data if possible. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Angela to talk about best practices and considerations.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, as you start to look at incorporating ePRO into your trials, let's break down the pieces within the study lifecycle using a patient-centric approach at every step. In the design phase, consider if ePRO is even right for your trial. Is it feasible to use ePRO at your study sites? For example, is the population or location conducive to electronic data capture? At startup, there are several things to consider, like monitoring, how ePRO data will be monitored and documented in the monitoring plans. And consider logistics and time for ePRO setup and testing, as well as training of the site staff, which I'll go over in more detail later, along with the considerations for the conduct portion of training, patients, and data review. And finally, for study closeout, consider what study lock and data archiving means for ePRO data. Is it a separate process in your EDC system or included? Either way, make sure it's documented. And the same is true for removing access. Do you need to revoke permissions for patients to the ePRO system or app like you do for study site staff in your EDC system? Okay, with that in mind, there are some best practices per the Critical Path ECOA Consortium, which is the Electronic Clinical Outcome Assessment Consortium. A lot of these are taken care of automatically in DFengage, but some you have to make conscious choices in the design process. For instance, if you're using a validated instrument, you'll need to check for copyright requirements. If it was intended for paper, is it okay to use an ePRO? And if so, display the title and the information electronically. I won't go through all of these, but just to highlight a few of these, they suggest implementing a single item per screen and using branching logic like Laura showed in the demo, skipping a question such as if you ask any medications and they answer no, then don't show the question, the follow-up question asking for medication detail. You want to keep the font consistent throughout your screen, and also you want to make items self-contained. And here's an example of that. On the left-hand side, you'll see this is the paper version of the survey. The question is number 9, and you can see the instructions at the top. It's in bold font, and some of the font is underlined. Then the responses are listed horizontally, and all the questions are listed on one page. And you can see that you're supposed to check a box. And then on the right-hand side, as you saw in the demo, DFengage, we keep the font and the instructions are still highlighted. We don't need to use the item number, but we still have the bold font. We still have the during the past 4 weeks underlined. We keep that as the same exact as the paper version. We have one question per screen, and instead of the horizontal responses, we have them vertically so they can all fit on one screen. But like their suggestions, we have the font consistent and all on one page. So going back to the life cycle considerations at setup and conduct, once patient data is received, you'll want to consider how ePRO data is monitored. Again, is it the same as your other EDC data, or is it a separate process? And what is the plan for safety of the patient? What if they submit a response for a severe reaction? What is the process? Will the site or clinician contact the patient once they receive that submission? And is this process documented somewhere for the site to reference to so it's always enacted consistently? And what is the plan for missing data? Like Laura showed, you can see the overdue visit. If the patient doesn't submit data for a day or more, will the site contact the patient, or will those surveys be considered not done? And if there are corrections to be made, what's the process there? Laura showed the site correcting it and providing a reason for data change. And will you want that every time? Do you want the site to be allowed to correct the data? Or is it going to be a more formal process? Do you want your PI involved? And do you want to keep the original responses on your CRF and then perhaps have updated responses kept on a separate CRF? Or you could just simply track it through the audit trail, as Laura showed. And so training the site on how to use ePRO technology is vital to ensuring that the patient will be well trained. Discuss possible troubleshooting issues with the site staff and provide them with robust support throughout the study so they know who to contact for additional help if the patient requires it. And training site staff, consider their technology experience. Have they ever used ePRO solutions before? If not, perhaps longer training or more support or documentation that they can refer to is needed. Also, consider how many other systems are in use at the site. Are they using specimen tracking systems or eConsent, et cetera? Because this is yet another system that they'll have to manage. Just make sure that they're set up to be successful. And we wanted well-trained staff so that they can successfully train the patient. For DFengage users, we recommend staff sit with and help the patient install the app on their device, if it's BYOD. And complete a practice activity, as Laura showed in the demo, with the site staff looking on to ensure that the patient is comfortable using the app before they leave the site. And site staff should also advise patients what to do if for some reason they can't use the app or decide to stop using it midway through. What are their backup options? Will they use paper or will they call the site, et cetera? And also, if the patient loses their phone or if they get a new device halfway through the study, site staff should provide instructions beforehand as needed on how to reinstall the app on their new device. And so device considerations. So there are some compatibility requirements for DFengage. We require Android users to have version 8.0 or newer for their phone. And Apple users, we require version 14.4 or newer. Storage space needed for DFengage app and the associated data is relatively small, about 50 megabytes. And of course, it requires Wi-Fi or cellular connection to sync with the server once the participant's online. Phone and app updates, if there's mid-study changes in the middle of the study, those sync automatically to the app. The participant doesn't need to log out. And the app auto updates with new releases based on device settings set by the participant. And also DFnet ensures compatibility with Apple or Android updates. Right, and finally, if you're interested in reading more about best practices for electronic capture and clinical trials, here are some links for a few more resources that you can follow up on. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. All right, I see some questions already going in the chat, but please, if you haven't had a chance to ask your question, please feel free to throw it in. I'm going to scroll back and look at some of the questions that came up so far. So Alexis asked, is it possible to save and come back to the task later? Or if a participant exits partway through, do they need to restart from the beginning? As you might have seen in the demo, there is an exit button up at the top left when you're inside an activity. And so clicking on that exit button will just take you back to the page, and you'll be able to click the continue button to open up that activity and continue where you left off. So they won't need to restart from the beginning. They'll be able to continue where they left off if they get interrupted. And thanks, JB, for answering that already in the chat. Nadine asks, are participants able to edit previously completed tasks once they've been submitted? and they can't. So as I showed in the demo, once they click finish, that data goes over to the research team, and they're able to see the history of what activities they've completed, but they can't see the actual contents, and they can't make any changes to it. So right now, if there are any changes that are required to the ePRO data, that will need to happen by the site staff or by the DM team or whatever your managed process is for that for your study. That makes sense for, you know, the criticality level of the data. Some questions about notifications. So yeah, so while you're doing the setup, you're asked to enable notifications. Those notification settings are also available in the settings app on your device too. So those can be updated at a later date after the app setup phase. And there isn't a snooze option right now. Alexis also asked that if there's a option to snooze the notifications. There's not at this point. There's some other questions. Robert asks, if you stop the app running in the background, does it stop notifications? JB, I'm not sure if you answered this one in the chat yet, but on Android only, you do need to allow background running in order to send the notifications on time. So with Android, you can actually change your notification settings so that if you're in low power mode, you delay your notifications. And so allowing the background running, make sure you get the notifications on the time described in your protocol. So that's that extra extra permission that you need to include in Android. It's not required for iOS. Suzanne asks, how do you manage sites and participants who have a lot of connectivity issues? So with DFengage, fortunately, the connectivity issues are much less of a problem because they can complete the activities offline. So they don't need to have an internet or cellular connection when they have DFengage open. They do need an internet connection to actually send that data over to DFdiscover so that the site staff can review it. But yeah, we know it can be certainly an issue in certain areas, and so we specifically did design DFengage to support offline use. So Lisa, I think I answered your question about how it works offline for participants. I can get into a little bit more detail. So when they open an activity, they can do that offline. When they open the app and open an activity, if they're offline, that's fine. When they click finish, that data gets saved to their device and then gets synced with the server if they're offline. If they're not offline, the data gets saved locally on their device, and the app will try to send it again later on when they're offline. And so if you go into the history view, I showed you a quick look at the history tab in DFengage. You might have seen that the previous activities were labeled as sent. Those will be labeled as pending instead. And so if the participant goes back online on the pending page, there's a little cloud icon up at the top that will send that data over to the server once they do have an internet connection again. Lots of great questions. Vincent asks, are you expecting to add notifications if the subject did not sync offline data? That's a really good point. I think that would be a good thing for us to look into to try to remind the participant if they do have several different pending activities in the past. So I think that's a great point, Vincent, that we should look into to help make sure that they're opening up the app to sync the data in addition to opening the app to actually complete the activities. So Robert asks, how do you handle with tools of potentially thousands of users to manage? Example, notify their account of being available for use. So right now, the user account management is very similar to other DFdiscover users. And so you would sort of adapt your existing processes to work sort of at the site level. But we are planning to be adding further tools, especially say in DFweb, for example, for the sites to help manage the user side of things so that more of the process can be automated from the site side when DFengage users are ready to install the app. Emily asks, what happens if a participant forgets their PIN? There is an option to exit the PIN screen, and that will take them back to the login screen, and then they can log in again and set a new PIN. So that does require that they still remember their username and password for the application so that they can log in and set a new PIN. So it is possible. but it might be required for them to get in touch with a site if they've lost track of their username and password that they used when they initially set the app up. Eric has a question about list view, whether there is an indication that the participant used the ePRO app or DFweb or DFexplorer EDC to provide responses. There isn't currently a way to do that, but that's something we're planning to add in the future, where there can be more fields that will auto-populate with information relevant to the way that the data was collected. It's not available right now. Okay, lots of questions. These are great. How do you manage Android and iOS app updates? Suzanne asks. Will user need to go back to the store to upload new version? Are users notified to do this? So with the app updates, it depends on the device settings. So the users on the device are able to choose whether or not to auto update their apps or to manually update their apps. So the way DFengage works is the same way that all their other apps will work on their device. And so it sort of depends on how they have that setting updated. I think a lot of people just have auto update enabled, and so they'll automatically get the new versions from the app stores when they're available. But if they have that disabled, they will need to go to and update that to the new version manually. How hands-on is any DF help to site and users if site users having technical issues with the app? What's your average turnaround time? So I don't think we've had any. I think we've maybe had one or two help requests where we've needed to help the participant through some things. We do have an extensive list of potential errors that you might see in DFengage. So we try to be proactive, and that's part of the site training that Angela mentioned, is that helping them be aware of the different types of error messages. And the error messages include error codes, so you know sort of exactly what's happening. And we provide guidance in the documentation about what exactly to do when you get different types of errors. But help@dfnetresearch.com is our email address for the support team, and we always aim to answer support requests within the same business day. And definitely when it's patient-involved support requests, those are definitely our top priority for the day, to get those answered as quickly as possible. And JB did add a slight modification to what I said about background running. Background running doesn't stop the notifications from being on time. The background running ensures that the user in case the user ignores notifications and they don't open the app for a long time, they'll continue to receive notifications. So this would be the case where they're receiving a lot of they've received a lot of notifications and they're ignoring them. They're not opening the app. And so this will make sure that they'll keep on getting notifications. But hopefully by the time the participants reach that point, if they've ignored so many notifications, that the site has taken a proactive approach to addressing the issue. And Andres has a nice comment about thanks to the team. So thank you, Andres, appreciate that. And Robert commented, I saw answer selection example, no boxes or locations to check. Older users may likely be confused. Yeah, that's an interesting example. Yeah, we recognize that different types of things might be more difficult. So that's part of the training of the actual participant and having a practice activity for them to try to get them as comfortable as possible using the app. So yeah, that's good feedback, Robert. Thank you. Awesome. So we're a little over time. So thank you so much, everyone, for your great questions. Appreciate the interaction in the chat. And thanks to the team to helping answering everything. So if you are ready to get started to try DFengage in your next study, please go ahead and contact us at info@dfnetresearch.com or reach out to any of us that you know at DFnet. We'd love it if you could complete a short survey. You can use a QR code to scan, or Laura just dropped the link in the chat. We'd love to get your feedback to help us develop additional webinars over the course of the year and incorporate your feedback into our planning. And a reminder again about the webinar coming up in April, looking at our online and offline solutions specifically, and our DFUG meeting coming up in October. Registration for that will open in April. So we're looking forward to continuing to engage with you and seeing, unfortunately not your faces for the next webinar, but I love seeing everyone's names. And thanks so much everyone for joining us today. I appreciate it. Have a great day.